Welcome to our March CSA Ideas Lab. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out with us today and talk about cooperative farming. We'll get started here in just a moment. As you join the meeting, please try to keep yourself on mute, but we will have lots of opportunity for discussion and conversation throughout today's call. If you would like to introduce yourself now in the chat, that is more than welcome. We love knowing who is here joining from different parts of the country. If you're a farmer or a farmer support organization representative, please feel free to drop your introduction of who you are, what farm or organization you're with, and where you're calling in from into the chat. And my name is Sadie. I'm the network coordinator with the CSA Innovation Network. We are the host of the CSA Ideas Lab that happens about every month or every other month, pending speakers and farmers being available to chat with us. So keep tuned to our CSA Ideas Lab page on the CSA Innovation Network website if you want to learn about future sessions of this webinar series. So again, thanks for joining us and keep introducing yourself in the chat. We're going to go ahead and get started as I introduce today's session, which features Eric Sannerud from Farm Generations Cooperative and Grown By to talk with us and lead an interactive workshop about the power of cooperative farming. I'll give a quick introduction to the Innovation Network before passing it over to Eric to talk about the history of farmer cooperatives and then lead us through an interactive cooperative exercise. And we'll wrap up with some Q&A time and share resources. So a quick intro, the CSA Innovation Network has been around for about 8 years now, and it's a group of technical assistance providers from nonprofit organizations and institutions across the US, along with farmers, connecting all of us in order to uplift community-supported agriculture and advancing educational opportunities, working for more equitable CSA models and greater accessibility in general. We also generally build awareness of what CSA is and the value of it for consumers, including a lot of marketing efforts for CSA farms. This picture is from last May when we were fortunate enough to be able to gather in person up in the Hudson Valley area of New York and do a couple of farm tours and work on planning our network's efforts. I do have an update that was shared over our newsletter a couple of weeks ago that's less bright than the ability for us to have gathered together in person, which was a bright spot for our network. We unfortunately are facing we've faced a termination of our federal funding at the moment. So the Farmers Market Promotional Program grant that has supported our innovation network is now no longer on the table. So just putting that out there so that we can be transparent with all of you. If you have any ideas on how you would like to collaborate with us or elevate some of your own activities and programming that are relevant to CSA, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me directly at that info@csainnovationnetwork.org email address. And I would love to connect and talk with anybody about things that you might be able to contribute to the network, or even if you just have leads on funding ideas and opportunities for us to look into. Anything is welcome, and we really appreciate all of your time, attention, and collaboration as we work together in this CSA space. So now I'll hand it over to Eric to introduce Farm Generations Cooperative and Grown By, and then to talk with us about what cooperative farming means. Thanks, Eric, for being here today.
Yeah, hey everyone, thanks for coming. This is really usually this talk or workshop or whatever is in a casual space like a brewery or a coffee shop or a third space where rural folks and farmers gather. So I'm gonna do my best to provide that type of atmosphere here. This is one of 3 slides I think I have. But just this is my day job. I work at Farm Generations Co-op. We're America's first cooperatively owned online marketplace for farms. You all probably read that slide already, so we can just keep going along. Sadie, this is me. I meant to edit this and make this just like 3 bullet points. I farmed for a while. I still farm with my wife in central Minnesota. I used to grow hops. I work for Farm Generations now. So the most important thing I want to highlight about this is that this is an incomplete oral history. This is not, I'm not a scholar or a PhD. This is obviously an hour-long workshop. It's not a semester-long course at a university or some sort of higher institution of teaching. That would be the more appropriate space to learn about the not incomplete history of U.S. farmer cooperation. This is also heavily focused on farmer cooperation in the Midwest, which is where I'm from, and the story that I am able to tell. So um, I'm going to, or you can leave the screen up or whatever, but there's no presentation. So I'm just going to talk um, about a few things. My notes here. There's no slides. So feel free to take notes or just listen. Spend enough time in these things on slides. You don't need to have slides all the time. So now is one of the times we're not going to have slides. So we're going to organize this in chronological order, starting in the late 1800s. We'll go through the early 1900s, and we'll skip a big loop of time from roughly 1930s to today. We'll come ahead to today and talk about some modern examples of farmers cooperating, both with a big C or a little c. And then we'll do our workshop where we're all going to hypothetically start a cooperative together and answer some of the questions that cooperatives have to answer, farmer cooperatives have to answer. To give you like some more context up front, this is besides being an incomplete history. Um, the structure of this workshop, this conversation is I'm going to share bits of the history of farmers cooperating, specifically in the Midwest, that I have personally found a lot of inspiration from in my journey as a farmer and rural advocate, um, with the intention of being hopefully something that is kind of uplifting and hopeful, or optimistic at least. And then we're going to work on when we're going to enter the workshop portion where we're going to take all those really nice feelings and kind of crash them at the very challenging realities of cooperating, um, both in general, but also having a farmer cooperative. And then the last thing I'll say is that I want to be very clear that this is I'll use these words, maybe I'll forget to use them interchangeably, but when I say cooperative, I mean both big C, as in like a legally structured entity that is a cooperative, and little c, which I mean cooperating. The easiest example of that is to say maybe you and a couple farmers near you coordinate and bulk buy organic pig feed together. That's little c cooperating. You don't need to have a formal big C cooperative in order to do that, and you probably shouldn't just to do that. But I will talk about big C cooperatives and also cooperating um, throughout this talk. And I want to make sure that at the beginning we're very clear that you do not need a big C cooperative to cooperate, and that often the best um, practice is to little c cooperate before starting a big C cooperative. So all of that is to say, uh, let's talk about the late 1800s. Um, in the late 1800s, in 1867, a group was founded. This is one of the first farming groups of the, I guess it's not the modern era anymore. I don't know. One of the earliest farming groups that is still around today was founded in 1867. Their formal name back in 1867, which we'll get to some like cool, like how people used to organize and label themselves. It's very feels out of place these days, but it's called the National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry. There's an opportunity to interact, whether you want to come off mute or type in the chat. Um, would you, anyone want to guess what the National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry is called? Many of us, especially in the Midwest, and I think the East Coast, have heard of it. You might have a building of theirs in your town. Mariel, not the Farm Bureau, not the CCC, the National Grange of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry. It's the Grange. This is the Grange. If you've heard of the Grange movement, this is the Grange movement. This is the Grange. They shortened it significantly. They dropped the of the Order of Patrons of Husbandry, which is like reads like a title that some honorific someone would have in Great Britain 100 years ago. Um, So they were founded in 1867, and what they were organized around to do, and this was farmers cooperating. They're not a cooperative. There's a farmers cooperating. They were organized to encourage cooperation amongst back then farming families was the term that was used. They were early advocates for free rural mail delivery. I'm going to highlight some of, especially what these cooperating examples, what they advocated for, because it feels very inspirational to me. Um, Directly related to the Midwest, one of the founders of what I'll call the Grange in 1867 was named Oliver Kelly. His farm is about a 45-minute drive from my place. It has been protected and is still a farm and used a lot now for like egg education. There's a really awesome big plaque there delineating his role as a co-founder. Um, and some really, especially for modern times, like I think fairly radical things are said on that plaque about the importance of agriculture and farmers. And an extremely interesting note from the founding of the National Grange of the Order of the Patrons of Husbandry is that they had female co-founders in 1867. One thing that I think we will find in this history of these farmer cooperative movements is they are certainly not progressive socially by modern standards, but they were very progressive by their time standards, mostly around not just being for white males, mostly also white females could. So I'm not trying to erase the racism that they had, but just they in their time, wow. Okay. The Farmers Alliance, this was founded in 1875. The Farmers Alliance advocated against the crop lien system. They fought to tax the rich, and they advocated for debt relief and basically a loan forgiveness policies for poor farmers. They were out here doing the Lord's work for economic justice for farmers back in 1875. The Farmers Alliance continued to like merge and grow into other spaces over time, but it of itself does not exist anymore. Then we have the Farmers Home Improvement Society, which was founded in 1890. This was a farmers cooperative founded by Robert Lloyd Smith with the goal of lending to the Black community and Black farmers who were not allowed, who banks would not lend to in the past. Um, and that is a fun example of taking one of the things that big C cooperatives especially can be is creating your own economy for yourself. Saying, hey, this economy doesn't serve us for various reasons, and in this case, racism. We'll be our own bank. And cooperatives are a very powerful tool for that, and they remain a very powerful tool for communities, however segmented or identified or organized to serve themselves, and often better than they get served in a larger economy. All right, we're moving on to the early 1900s and the Great Depression. So in the early 1900s, in 1902, a group called the Farmers Educational Cooperative Union was founded. This one also still exists. Does anyone, I know I played this game before. This one's a little more, the Grange still exists as far as I know, but it's not maybe as active as this entity. This entity was called the Farmers Educational Cooperative Union. That last word is important. The Farmers Union. Thank you, Kara. Yes, this was the beginning of the what is now called the National Farmers Union. They were started in 1902. They were organized around kind of core principles of suffrage for women, direct election of U.S. senators, and they started and owned many successful cooperative businesses, big C cooperative businesses. Maybe the largest one is CHS, which is called Cenex Harvest States. That was owned by farmer cooperative at the very beginning. If anyone's in the Midwest, they go to CHS. There's gas stations that are CHS brand. Okay, 1913. This is a Minnesota specific one, but in 1913, the Finland Cooperative opened. This was in Finland, Minnesota, which, if you want to guess who lives in Finland and who immigrated to Minnesota and settled in Finland, you'd be correct that it was Finnish people. They opened their own cooperative general store to compete with, it was primarily a mining and logging community to compete with the company store. And the company store, no one knows, well, people remember the name of the company. That doesn't exist anymore, but that co-op is still operating. You can go to Finland, Minnesota, which is in northern Minnesota, and shop at the longest operating cooperative in Minnesota history, who I guess is 113 something years old. Pretty cool. Outlasting those miners, those extractors. 1915, the Nonpartisan League was formed. Has anybody heard of the Nonpartisan League? The NPL. This is a very important little c cooperation of rural people. They were founded in 1915 in North Dakota. It was an offshoot from the North Dakota Socialist Party. We're going to talk about a couple of different political parties here that are um, back in this time. There was a socialist party, and it wasn't scary to say that word in the political space. But the socialist parties tend to move into these more populist parties and find some success in the Midwest, particularly amongst rural voters and then increasingly unionized urban voters. So the Nonpartisan League was founded in 1915. They advocated for the socialization, public ownership of grain mills, elevators, banks, and other farm-related industries. They were Sarah Vogel, who wrote a really great book about this that I should have put in the resource list. But if you look up a book by Sarah Vogel, and I should have to remember the name of the book, but I don't right now. Um, her parents were big into this group, and so she's still with us. And she spoke at an event I was at the other day. She's a living descendant of the Prairie Populists. This was what they termed themselves, the Prairie Populists. Um, what the reason for starting this was that North Dakota wheat farmers were sick of all of their profits and being exploited by fat cats in Minneapolis, General Mills, Pillsbury, and the banks. And so they built their own mill in North Dakota. Um, that they owned. So it's currently the only state-owned milling facility in the U.S. It's owned by the state of North Dakota. You can buy their mill. It's called North Dakota Milling Company or North Dakota Mills. You can buy it in grocery stores, especially across the Midwest. That is a state-owned flour. Kind of neat. Okay, 1918, the Farmer Labor Party of Minnesota was founded. The Farmer Labor Party was an offshoot, sort of a Minnesota version of the founded in 1915 Nonpartisan League. The Minnesota Farmer Labor Party had a slogan of, by, and for the people. It was the most electorally successful third party in the history of America. Again, what they did was they brought together a coalition of rural people and farmers and uh, unionized laborers or not unionized laborers who were sick of the hand they were being dealt by the economy. They were very successful through the Depression, 1930s to 1936. They had three governors for the state of Minnesota. They had four state senators, eight U.S. House representatives. Excuse me, they had four U.S. senators from the state of Minnesota, eight U.S. House representatives, and then majorities in both state legislatures over that time. I share that to note that, political parties do come and go, and political alliances can be forged outside of the norm. Now, that hasn't been very successful since 1936. I don't know. We're living in different times now. Okay. In 1922, the Capper-Volstead Act. Anybody? The Volstead Act. Who knows the name of Volstead? Who here enjoys and or is a part of the booze industry in any way? Most famously, Volstead was one of the leaders of the Prohibition movement, but also what this senator did was he wrote and passed the Capper-Volstead Act. So the Capper-Volstead Act is the seminal piece of co-op law that still is in power today. The Capper-Volstead Act was a response to reaction from the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act. So the Sherman Antitrust Act of 1890 was one of the most powerful pieces of legislation to fight against the first Gilded Age. And in the 1900s, with the success of primarily farmer cooperatives, monopolists and capitalists were using the 1890 Sherman Antitrust Act to regulate and break up cooperatives who had become large and powerful. In 1922, the Capper-Volstead Act was passed, and this protected farmer cooperatives' rights to market cooperatively. So our country has done really cool things in its history. And Senator Volstead was a Minnesotan. He was from Goodhue County. 1932, we have the National Farmer Holiday Association. This is one of my favorites because they have both like a slogan and like a poem of like how they would market themselves. Like you get a little pin and it would have this information on it. They were founded in 1932. They're not directly around anymore, but the National Farmers Organization, or NFO, that's Sarah Vogel's book. Yeah. Thank you, Sadie. The NFO, the National Farmers Organization, is sort of a descendant of the National Farmer Holiday Association. So the National Farmer Holiday Association urged farmers to declare a holiday from farming, which would be a general strike of farmers in the country. Their slogan was stay at home, buy nothing, sell nothing. And so that would be on a pin. And then on their flyers or things, they would have this ditty. It's more of a poem. I'm not going to sing it for you, but I will read it for you. It says, let's call a farmer's holiday, a holiday let's hold. We'll eat our wheat and ham and eggs and let them eat their gold. The Farmer Holiday Association was never successful in hosting a nationwide farmer general strike. However, they were a large part of one of the most radical moments in American farming history, which was the 1933 Wisconsin milk strikes. There were a series of strikes in various areas of Wisconsin where farmers cooperated together, again, little c, sometimes with the support of the Farm Holiday Association chapters, to not sell milk below a parity price. They would not put their milk into the truck if they were not getting paid the appropriate amount for their milk. They also prevented milk trucks from coming into those areas to get the milk. Milk trucks were prevented from picking up and delivering milk. Creameries where milk was being collected at below parity value were being bombed after working hours when no one was present. And unfortunately, a farmer who was not striking, but was feeding protesters or strikers was killed by a jackboot in 1933. His name was Gunder Felland. I'll write it in the chat. Gunder Felland. I had to pay some newspaper archive website money to get to an article that had his name. If you look around on the internet, his name is not there. I think it's important that his name is there. There was very little. He was the only one who died in the Wisconsin milk strikes. And he wasn't striking. He was just there feeding farmers who were. Okay. I I that's where my oral history ends. My incomplete oral history ends. I think that I hope that it was something that was somewhat inspiring, or there are parts of it that were inspiring for you. I think, we are less than 100 years from the Wisconsin milk strikes. We are roughly 100 years from the Capper-Volstead Act. Um, that's a long time, but there are people who were alive then who are still alive now. It's not that long of a time. Um, there's there's inspiration in that for me. We're going to jump way ahead. We're going to pass all the amazing stuff that happened in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, the tractorcades, the lawsuit against the USDA, the foreclosure crisis, many bits of more modern history, the decimation of rural life and people through the Reagan administration, um, and get big or get out policies. And we're going to come to current examples of Midwest farmer cooperative action. So I have three examples here for you. Number one is the Summer Kitchen Cooperative. This is a big C co-op of farmers in eastern Minnesota who are marketing cooperatively. They're direct to consumer, direct to farmer, excuse me, direct to consumer, right? Direct to consumer products from their various farms so that they can offer consumers, closer to a full diet or a full sort of grocery shopping experience. Another one is Bayfield Food Cooperative. This is a formal cooperative that involves much larger. It's about 20 plus farms, and this is in Bayfield, Wisconsin, in and around Bayfield, Wisconsin. 20 plus farms and food vendors, and again, collaborative marketing of their products. And then finally, one that I'd like to highlight is the Perennial Promise Growers Cooperative. This is a co-op that was founded in Minnesota and is built to support the adoption and sales of perennial crops, specifically Kernza, if you've heard of Kernza. This one I think is very cool because Kernza has all this gas behind it from large, primarily they're called CMGs, big consumers, manufactured goods companies who want to say that they're doing things more sustainably. And Kernza is sort of used as, can be used as a greenwashing or like a, I don't know, yeah, who knows how much they really believe in it. And having a growers cooperative involved in this burgeoning market is a great opportunity to make sure that growers' needs are being met and growers are not just being a cost that gets minimized as this market for this new crop develops. So that's pretty neat too. I'm going to pause before we go to our workshop and Sadie brings up that QR code to just like take a breath and to take a moment between the oral history and shifting gears into a hypothetical modern reality of opening a co-op with all of you. For any questions or comments or water break.
I'm curious if anyone on the call with us is part of a farmer cooperative. If you are, can speak up or just put it in the chat if you prefer.
I mean, I guess I am it as farm generations, but yeah, we all knew that. Maybe some of you at least are on a rural electric cooperative, or you buy your feed from the local dairy co-op or feed co-op. That also might be a very Midwest experience. My electricity is co-op, my propane is co-op, my internet is co-op, and my feed is co-op, and my seed is co-op, and it's not because it's just because it's been that way. This is inheriting the cooperative started in the 1900s. Trying to cooperate stage. It's excellent. Deep Root as co-op of organic veggie growers. Mario was just this cool inheritance of past radical farmers and rural people. It is also really awesome in the current context. I try to explain it to my other rural neighbors and my urban neighbors, friends who are, you know, but anyway, and it's fun to say like, hey, we well, I have great internet. They ran fiber down my road with like 13 neighbors on it, which a private entity would literally never do. Um, and I pay less than my friends in the urban in Minneapolis who have, you know, who are stuck inside a monopoly of an internet service provider. So co-ops remain powerful, and co-ops are outside of agriculture and even outside of rural settings. Cooperatives are an amazing tool um, for communities to better serve themselves. That's just really, I don't know if that's the shortest way I can get to it, but oh my gosh, Starlink. Well, I have a lot of older neighbors who, when the co-op came through to put in fiber, you had to like pay them $100 to like do the connection from the road to your house, which is also absurd because our houses are like sometimes far away from the road. It's very cheap. But they're on not Starlink, but they're on like satellite internet, which is a complete scam and taking advantage of old, particularly rural Americans who don't know that the internet's unlimited. Like my neighbors have limits on how much data they can use. Oh, on their home internet service. Anyway, all right, let's talk about a modern co-op of veggies that we're all going to start together. If you would, Sadie, put up the QR code, and then there's a little linky link as well that we'll put in the chat. So when you click on that, you'll be brought to a Google survey that I've made just for you all today. This is us starting a hypothetical, fictional, cooperative arrangement called the Northern Farmer Group. The Northern Farmer Group has 30 member farms. We're pretending there's 30 of us or whatever that provide a wide variety of produce, and they wish to cooperatively process and market produce from member farms. We are their board of directors, and we are writing our bylaws, and deciding how to purchase facilities, how much to pay a general manager, blah, 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 blah. We are going to answer the following questions as if we were one of those board members. And I want to give credit to Steve Richards, who's the director of the South Carolina Center for Cooperative and Enterprise Development at Clemson University. He gave this a much longer version of this workshop over 3 hours, over 2 days at a conference I was at many years ago. And I was like, hey, this is awesome. Can I adapt this for cooperative education? And in the co-op space, the answer is almost always yes, because it's cooperative. we're cooperating. So I've adapted it significantly to make it fit, an hour timeline. And I am certainly not the type of co-op development expert that Steve is. But I think nonetheless, we can learn a bunch from this process together. So if you'll please scan that link, I've got it down to 5 questions. 9 questions. 9 questions. Don't overthink it. Go with what feels like the correct choice. There is no objectively correct choice. And then your answers are anonymous. And we will look at the responses together and discuss sort of the implications here. Again, we're moving in from like this really big, in my opinion, hopeful, optimistic history. And now we're going to drop into a very nitty-gritty practical talk about cooperating as farmers. I should say I've done this talk in many spaces with many different groups of farmers in different geographies and regions, and there's been no consistent sort of choices made. Okay, so welcome to the Northern Farmer Group. Very excited to be cooperating with all of you. Here's some decisions that we need to make. All right, we're going to buy some facilities for packing and storage, and it's going to cost 1.2 mil. Boy, that's a lot of money. All right, how should the 30 farmers finance this purchase? The majority, which is not the over 50%, but the highest answer was 20,000 cash from each member and $600,000 in debt. This question is tricky because it's big numbers that most of us don't deal with on a daily basis. But it is an interesting question for this cooperative that is being organized around a physical asset like this, facilities for picking and packing. That's a lot of money they got to come up with up front. And how are they going to do that? Northern Farmer Group needs to allocate membership based on the amount that each member contributes. And how do we measure membership contribution? The far and away 20 of you felt like the number one choice would be to base it on a combination of above items, which were acres of farm production, pounds of produce each farm commits to producing for the co-op, and then how much cash they produce for the co-op. In fact, nobody liked that as the first answer. This is an opportunity, and I need to figure out how to screw with Zoom so I can see the chat. But this would be a great time to chat. I got it. In the chat about what your thoughts are on this topic as we go through these questions. So when you were filling out question 2 here, I should probably make myself a note to add question numbers for all of our sanities. Add question numbers. For question number 2 here, I'm sure I've given myself that note, by the way, in the past, writing this down. I'm like, oh, it's a great idea. And then I forget. When you were responding to question 2, what made you select what you selected? Or what made you not select basing membership on how much cash each member commits to the arrangement?
I can share. I chose that fourth option of combination because it seems like there could be inequities across the farms that want to participate in the co-op, but that shouldn't necessarily be held against them. So scaling the different contributions like pounds of produce versus cash bought in felt like a more fair approach.
Maria more or less wrote that cash flow shouldn't hinder participation. Becky says, when I think about cooperative, I think of helping members ride through tough years, so not about pounds. Thank you all for sharing. Cash is not king. That's right. I'm going to move on to question 3 here. Please keep the chat going. This is how we're just going to walk through this, and we can share and talk about our responses and why. Question 3, this is one of my favorites. Northern Farmer Group earns a profit. Hey, that's a great problem to have. How should these earnings be distributed to members? I should probably just delete this bit about taxes. It's kind of like pedantic for this, but what do we do with the profits? Retain 25 and distribute 75 was what 12 folks said. The second most popular was retain 50, distribute 50. Any comments here on question 3? Question 3 about what to do with the profits that the co-op generates. This is an interesting part about co-ops, by the way. Um, Co-ops, when they have profit, depending on how exactly they're structured, they go to the members. Co-ops are not a private business where there's sort of ultimately one person or a group of people who are hoovering up all the profits. The profits get generated, and then the co-op decides what to do with those profits. It's not automatically going to someone's next yacht. Yeah, wait until they actually have profit. Kara, that's a fun note. Maybe don't decide till you have it. First 3 years pay down debt. Depends on debt and current goals. I think this is very like it depends on the current state of the co-op. I think this question is here because a co-op developer who are like often act as consultants to support co-ops through a difficult and unusual business starting. Uh, you know, some people know how to start like a business. I mean, a lot of us farm, we have a business, but starting a cooperative, which is a business, is a whole different sort of can of worms. And so there's a lot of people out there to support co-ops in going through that process. I would guess that this question is here just to say that, hey, when there's profit, that's another problem to solve, and it's another cooperative choice that needs to be made that can be tricky. Um, that can be tricky for farms. Okay. Question 4. Northern Farmer Group needs to hire a general manager. What salary range seems adequate? This is my favorite question because of the discussion it often generates. So we have 41% respondents say 56 to 65, 30% say 66 to 75, and then the third highest was 46 to 55. And we have the full range covered here. I think we have 35. Oh, we do not have 35. So our minimum salary here is 46 to 55. One of the most common pieces of feedback here is, and discussion points is, that's more than I make farming. This GM is running everything. This GM is in charge of bringing in the produce, cleaning, making sure the produce is clean, selling the produce, interacting with vendors, interacting with the farmers, making sure the purchase orders are filled, making sure the truck is there, the skid loader is there when the truck shows up to get the pallet of watermelons. This question is, yeah, often there have been talks where like the farmers have felt like they didn't want to pay the person more than the farmers made. And then there was a conversation about, well, who you're going to get to run your, functionally your business for 35 to $45,000, and is that someone who you want to be running your business? And then also, what's the justice or equity in a co-op if you're underpaying someone for their work? Yes, agricultural justice is something that I think about a lot. If you were a general manager of a co-op, you sort of probably have like one boss. But you might be the boss, and then other people report to you, and then you report to the board, and your board is all bosses. Plus, all the members might feel a little bit like they could be your boss. Um, so it's both general managing whatever that business is, but then also the ability to manage a lot of relationships. Moving on to question 5, I think. I've lost track. This next question. Um, Northern Farmer Group wants to restrict members from selling their produce outside of the cooperative arrangement. If a member sells produce outside of the cooperative arrangement, they'll be required to leave the group and lose the equity. What do you think? How fair is this? Somewhat unfair, somewhat fair, or totally unfair? This is getting at one of the biggest problems that some cooperatives have of what is called selling around the co-op. Co-op does all the work to make a relationship with this vendor, but the co-op, of course, sells at a premium relative to the individual farmers because the co-op's supporting general manager and the co-op's facilities. Um, let's say there was I'm familiar with a co-op where this is an issue where there's a farmer who, hears that the co-op is selling the farmer's product to company Y, and then the farmer goes to company Y and offers their product at below the co-op price, because there's no co-op markup anymore. This is a challenge for co-ops, can be a challenge for co-ops. So it might sound really harsh, this policy that is proposed here, but just from a co-op perspective, this can be a challenge. Northern Farmer Group is approached by non-members about selling their produce. What should they do? Highest one is not selling non-members produce. Excuse me. Yes. And then the next one was, wait, agree to now sell non-members produce if it's needed to fill an order for a fee. That seems like a pretty good outcome. But again, it's like yeah, if it's needed to fill an order feels really important to me in this space, not to introduce my opinion, but to share a little bit. Like, hey, if the co-op starts selling other people's stuff when it could have sold the co-op stuff, then what are we doing as a co-op? Could just not. Three more. A new farmer approaches farmers northern farmer group about joining. How should this be handled? Board approval and either and provide equity based on current balance sheet or on the original amount. Second to last question, has a producer that brings in extremely dirty produce. I like this one. This is always a good conversation. Accept the produce and give the farmer a warning is the most popular. Accept the produce and charge the farmer for washing it is the next one. I like this question primarily because if I were sitting around starting a co-op, I don't know how long it would take me to until I thought about this. Probably like the first day someone showed up with produce that was too dirty to sell. And then this one gets at it in a very pointed way because we're dealing with big O organic basically here. Hey, we're selling organic produce. Someone doesn't have the appropriate paperwork. What do we do? And it's interesting to have like, all right, it's dirty and like, we can respond to that in different ways. But when you're threatening like maybe the organic certification of the facility that the co-op is operating, you can see that the uh, response from the co-op, we would all have it be a little more severe. So the sort of these levels of what is the word? It's not the right word, but um, like cooperative, not being a good cooperative member, right? Of selling around the co-op is a question, bringing in dirty produce or not having, you know, I think yeah, gaps is the most likely one that would be tricky that you would not want to not have. Kara is a excellent food safety mind. Am I surprised that you wrote gaps in the chat, Kara? No, I'm not. Also, we're coworkers. Ooh, there's any Sarah project on starting a co-op. Locally grown co-op spent an entire year answering the questions in your survey before they got started. Yeah, from like a co-op, big C co-op starting process, like the way that a lot of co-op development folks talk about it is sort of the last thing you do is make the big C legal entity with a bank account and tax number and documents. You start by cooperating and you start by having a lot of conversations about what the co-op would do once it exists. And then once you get all the way to the point of knowing what you're planning to do and raising the money that you need, then you formally start the co-op. It's like the last thing you do is now you have a co-op, not I build a co-op and now I'm going to figure out what we're doing with it, which is probably a good, like a decent, it's a very methodical way to approach a lot of things. But yeah, spending years or year before starting a co-op is not uncommon. Okay, that is our workshop. Thank you for participating in that. Thank you for being part of the oral history. I'm going to stop sharing this. And we are here for another 9 minutes or so to talk or chat or whatever.
Yeah, I have a slide that just says Q&A, type in the chat or raise your hand. So I don't have to put that in front of all of you. If anyone has questions about the survey experience or cooperatives in general, or if you want to share some of your own input, we do have a few minutes before we move into sharing resources and wrapping up.
Thanks for being here, Egg Justice. See you.
I'm curious about the question about the amount of money that people are first putting into the co-op. I mean, those are big numbers. Do you know of anything out there that uses any sort of like sliding scale or like different pay models for each member?
I mean, a co-op could do whatever they'd like.
Yeah.
This is, I think, a challenging one because it's a physical co-op. Like this entity would have expensive physical assets. But there's a lot of ways to be even a big C co-op where you don't actually really own anything, and the value of what you would need to raise or manage would be a lot less. So it totally depends on the application, like how big that number would be. But for things where there's big numbers and not the the community that the co-op is serving doesn't have the means to make those big numbers happen by themselves. There's just like there are banks and investors in not co-op land, there are banks and investors in co-op land and fundraisers and funders, and they have different, there are not really VC co-op people, but there's, people who invest in co-ops who are looking for big money returns, and there's people who invest in co-ops who are functionally looking to help co-ops, regardless of the return. So there's this big gamut of support network out there, which is not directly answering your question, besides to say that like a co-op could have a sliding scale if a co-op wanted to have a sliding scale. I think it's very common for co-ops that are capitalizing themselves with member contributions to find a way to put a value to both money, monetary contributions, but then also like sweat equity or time contributions, to try to create some space for that. I'm also not the only expert, or probably not even on this call, but certainly not an actual expert on any of this. This is my opinion. I do not have a PhD like Steve Richards. I don't know that I could sit down for that long. PhD is a lot of sitting.
I think also to Caroline's question, there's like that payout piece, like how much does somebody make, can also, I think, in a certain kind of co-op depend on how much they're putting in, right? So if you're selling 50% of the produce through this co-op because your farm is really big and you have that much produce to sell, then maybe the share of the payouts you get is larger because the profit generated by the co-op is larger. And that seems really fair, even maybe to a smaller farm where you're like, well, I'd like more payout, but like that's based on the scale. So I think all of those are kind of interesting conversations to be having about what are we trying to do here and who are we trying to include at this table, and how do we all think this is fair or not.
Edgar Barry asked if there's any up and coming or super innovative co-ops to keep an eye on for inspiration or learning. I will answer that with saying that one of the spaces I think cooperatives are really interesting is in tech, because of the sort of business model that tech has assumed recently. I don't mean recently like a year, but from the dot-com boom and forward, of being very profit motivated and seeing how that warps the benefits that tech can have in lives and societies. I'm very interested in cooperatives in tech, and in that space, there's this idea, there's a lot of groups of books about platform cooperatives. That's a word that's been used to term platform co-op. That'd be like a type of co-op and a thing to learn about Acreberry. Now, that's not necessarily farm specific, but I think it's a cool space that's, to me, is very innovative. And I think about places that co-ops can have a big impact as places where either monopolies or capitalistic entities have run maybe too far or have too much power or control, because a co-op can be a way to continue to deliver similar services at probably a way more efficient price point, i.e. my internet service provider being better product for less price than what the big market in the Twin Cities receives. And that's, I mean, it's not 100% because they're a co-op, but it's like, what, 95% because they're a co-op. And so I think that that's where I look for innovation, if that's a word for it. I like using the word innovation to not define high profit margins, but to define competitive pricing and service offerings. Innovation is so often about a new product that's profiting a lot off of people, versus what if it was innovation was about doing things better. Anyway. Taxes can be tricky for cooperatives. If you're a member owner of a co-op and the co-op reports a profit, that goes onto your taxes, whether it's your entity that owns the co-op or you. So there's extra tax forms and extra tax considerations for cooperative owners. Often in like large scale utility co-ops, there's tax code where they're sort of handled by the co-op. So that's kind of interesting. Danny, thank you for the note about Finland. Healthy group fiscal management. Part of the co-op universe, the co-op multiverse, is co-op accountants, and those are the people you'd want to work with. Kelly is interested in talking to other farmers who are working on starting little C co-ops for market booths or CSAs with other farms. Oh my gosh, you're starting a collaborative farmers market booth this year? I've always dreamed of a farmer-owned cooperative farmers market. As a farm who primarily sells at farmers markets, I've seen the ups and downs of like non-farmer farmers market management. That's my big C, kind of little C co-op dream right now, is farmer cooperatively owned farmers market. We have 2 minutes left, and so I'm going to say that Sadie, would you put up our little resource slides, and I can kind of highlight a couple of them. Danny's comment there makes me think of that meme where it's like, I heard you like hamburgers, so I put hamburgers on your hamburgers. This is, I heard you like co-ops, and so there's a co-op accounting for a co-op. Does co-op accounting for co-ops. It's good stuff. Co-ops, in the co-op space, there is a lot of like, hey, we're the co-op printer of checks for co-ops. We're the co-op office printer paper supply co-op for co-ops. Co-ops are very much about supporting other co-ops. And I work at a tech co-op, there's actually not that many in tech. Like if we were doing a farm co-op, there'd be a farm co-op we could buy our seeds from. But in tech, one of the big things you need is like server capacity. There's not a co-op server farm. There's not a co-op internet payment processor. Interesting things. Those would be great opportunities for innovation. Okay, we've got CSA resources from CSA Innovation Network. This is an incomplete list of cooperative resources. Many have been posted in the chat, which I would recommend everybody check out. Number 2 is the book that I learned a lot of this history from, or at least like insights into it, and that did some of my own research on, was The Populist Moment, A Short History of Agrarian Revolt in America, which is like a little drier than it could be. But it's not too expensive used, and it's got a really cool like 70s 80s cover design. That's pretty neat. Be nice on a t-shirt. Cooperative Development Services, this is an example of one of many. They're kind of like consulting firms, I guess, who support cooperatives. This one happens to be based in Minnesota. There's CoBank, which is, you might guess, it's a cooperative bank. Oh, for my co-op made t-shirts for my co-op, I go to Opportunity Threads. Thanks, Danny. Here's, I neglected to remove the Find CSA Resources duplicate, but it's so good if they're twice. There's our link to Grown by Co-op if you want to learn about us. The guidebook for farmer cooperatives by Greenhorns is specifically about farmer cooperation and cooperating, that members of Brumby's team suggested was a great one. I haven't read it yet. And then another one suggested by the team was Collective Courage, A History of African American Cooperative Economic Thought and Practice. Now, this is basically a textbook, and the cheapest I could find it used was $50. But from like a reference and or super nerd, this is an angle that this is a book I would love to both have and read. Also, there's a lot of co-op stuff online for free. Just want to be honest, you don't need to buy a book to learn about co-ops. There's a lot out there. And if you really like a book and you can't find a way to pay for it, there might be someone out there who will send you the PDF or send you the book. There's co-op forums and co-op spaces that this is all very common. And then here's the last couple. You can sign up for CSA Week, which has just passed, but you can grab it for next year. You can connect with CSA Innovations on social media, and you can stay in touch on future CSA Ideas Lab things. Now, Sadie, I realize half of these resources were links that I had submitted, and half would be the ones that you usually present, but I think I did okay.
Yeah, I think you did great, Eric. Thank you so much for walking us through all of those resources, co-op related or the larger CSA Innovation Network scope of resources. We're really glad that we had such a robust group here today. I personally enjoyed getting to engage in the survey and then see what everyone else contributed to this theoretical co-op that we formed together. I think that's the first for this CSA Ideas Lab, is actually incorporating an interactive exercise with the entire group. So Thank you all. If you do want to get in touch with Innovation Network, we have a robust website. You can also email us at that info account email address. And then we've also popped the Grown By website here for more information about Grown By and farm generations that Eric works with. So thanks, everyone. We will be posting the recording of this event within the next day or two. And we'll also, in the YouTube description and in the email that goes out, include links to the slides and resources. I'll check with Eric on whether we can share those survey results, or at least we'll make sure to share the survey. So you have those questions for reference. All right, that's all we've got for this month. Stay tuned for future CSA Ideas Labs, and thanks for joining us this afternoon.
Bye, y'all.